Okay, so now we're on to the final one, which is how well did Wilson and Callahan deal with problems faced by Britain between 1974 and 1979? And spoiler alert, probably not very well either.
It
Um,
hasn't been going very well so far.
yeah, it's not been a good first.
I'm counting the dot points on each of these
Yeah,
columns here.
it's not a good 15 years for the British prime ministers. So, okay, how do they deal with the economy? They get inflation under control. That's good because it had been up from 10, to 10% from 5% under Heaps. They managed to get the inflation under control, which is pretty good. But they've still got stagflation problems on the negative side, which is back to the 50s, which is just basically the legacy of Keynesian economics. There's inflation and there's no growth, which is a fatal combination. And I think the problem with Keynesian economics is it just gets worse and worse and worse because it builds on itself, because the way it solves it is to
Yeah,
make the problem worse. So
yeah.
obviously they didn't get any economic recovery in this period and leads to the winter of discontent, their economic managements. They don't get back, Wilson in his second attempt under Callahan, they don't get the balance of payments back into credit that they did in his first term. So that's where you can see that even though his first term wasn't good, it was still better than this one, which is how bad they now are. So the balance of payments remains in deficit. And I think the biggest killer for them is
The
that in
IMF. Oh,
1976, they have to take an IMF loan because the government was facing bankruptcy. And
that's that's
that's
bonkers,
bad.
James. That's
Huh?
bonkers. That's
Yes.
crazy.
Yes.
So, all right.
Um, they'd had a similar crisis in 1931 and that had destroyed the Labour government then. So like Labour's now had four governments of which they've had an IMF loan bailout and two devaluations of the pound. You can understand why Tony Blair had to do a lot of work to get Labour credibility in the economy by the time they come in.
Yes.
I think it's just unlucky because Labour keep winning elections and getting handed awful situations that they end up having to try and fix, but through solutions that make them right. I mean, it did temporarily save Britain from bankruptcy, but if you're at the point of bankruptcy as a major country, you're already in a big hole. And I don't think getting an IMF loan is not a marker of quality economic management. Wouldn't you agree?
It's not a great sign, no. It's not a great sign.
Has Australia ever had an IMF loan? How many developed countries have ever had to have an IMF bailout?
Greece.
Yeah, it's not good. Any more?
Greece comes to mind. My knowledge of Australian politics is lamentable,
Yeah.
lamentably poor, but not to my knowledge.
Certainly not in my memory, in my living memory, do I remember any of them getting bailouts.
Um,
Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Latvia,
oh,
Portugal.
Iceland.
Yeah.
Yes, that Iceland did, didn't it? I
Yeah.
remember that.
Portugal. Yeah.
All right.
I think so. I think that's true then that yeah, here other ones are Argentina, Armenia, Bangladesh, Barbados, Benin, Burkina Faso, Georgia,
Yeah.
Chile, Costa Rica, Papua New Guinea, Peru, Rwanda, Senegal, loads of others, Zambia.
So it's quite a lot. That's actually quite a long list, isn't there? It's not surprising.
Yes, but I believe we are the only major developed country on that list,
I
which
think that's astonishing. I actually didn't know that before I started reading this chapter.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's a fact that
yeah,
I don't know, I might pull that out to my British friends
yeah.
at the dinner table one day.
It's not good,
I
is it?
want to annoy them.
No.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Yeah. So I think getting inflation under control is no mean feat in this period. So it's not that they did
Uh,
nothing, but I just don't. I mean, again, it's just whether you think the IMF loan is down to their economic mismanagement or is it the country's just so destroyed by
yeah,
this point.
exactly. You can imagine both of those arguments being around, right? If you're depending on your allegiance.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, the left will be like, ah, it wasn't our fault. We got a bad economy from. I mean, the thing is, they're not wrong if they say, oh, we inherited a bad economy, but that is true for every government now since 1964. Like,
Yeah.
it's just worse and worse and worse. And I don't know, so they didn't get down to 3-day working week, but the winter of discontent is pretty awful. Do you like the winter? Do you want to deal with industrial relations as you want to talk about the winter of discontent?
Well, I guess we should talk about the social contract.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that sound fetching? The social contract?
Well, do you prefer it to in place of strife? It's obviously the third attempt, like to get rid of Labour, and by telling the unions, let's agree to you policing yourself, and the unions going, yeah, why not?
Uh, right.
We're a trustworthy bunch of people that haven't done anything to trash the country in the last week. So yes.
Okay. Yeah.
What's your
So
opinion on the
that's.
social contract? Do you think it was ever likely to work?
I have to say I was skeptical.
Yeah. Well, why are you
Um,
skeptical of this social contract?
for the reasons you already stated.
Yeah.
It seems more like almost like a face saving
Well, I assume because they're on the left, Callahan,
initiative.
I guess because Callahan had also sided with them on, had sided with the unions in place of strife against Wilson. So he probably thought he could have some leverage.
Hmm.
I think at this point, the trade unions are a law unto themselves.
Yes, that's definitely true. That's very difficult. Yeah, very difficult situation to control
Yeah.
unless you're brutal.
Yeah.
Um,
And like the country saw this as the Labour Party just giving and giving and giving to the trade unions, the trade unions taking and taking and taking. My uncle
yeah,
still says we can't have a Labour government because the trade unions will run the country. So I think
yeah. No, I bet
formed
there are
in his
people like
mind
that.
from this Callahan
Hmm.
era, you know what I mean? So it's still there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Even
I
though
mean,
this modern Labour Party is nothing like that. I don't even think under
no,
Corbyn they were that far to the left of the trade unions, but that legacy stays.
and I guess it doesn't. I mean, the unions aren't particularly vulnerable to public opinion, are they?
Um,
Surely there are many people who are angry with
yeah,
kind of chaos the unions are causing, but doesn't really, not they're not elected.
yeah,
They're looking after their own interests. So
yeah. And this social contract is obviously the idea. I guess it's like peace because they brought down the trade unions effectively brought with a 3-day working week have effectively brought down the Heap government. So they're
yeah.
obviously going to prefer to have a Labour government because it's more
So
sympathetic to Heath.
they threatened to destroy Heath and they carried out the
Yeah,
threat. So,
yeah. And you'd expect they'd prefer to have a left-wing government under Labour because they feel they'll get more out of it. But
oh, absolutely.
but
Yeah,
equally
absolutely.
equally they still want to get stuff out of it. You know what I mean? So it's not like Labour can just sit there and go, oh, we're a left-wing government, we can run this. So I think the agreement lasts up until the winter of discontent. And do you want to talk about the winter of discontent?
Um, so this is the winter of 73 to 74.
No. Winter of Discontent's the
No.
78 one. So Winter of Discontent's 78. And
Aha.
it's the one where all the major unions go on strike. Like the truck drivers do so nothing gets delivered. The bin men go on strikes. If you look at the pictures online, you can see rubbish everywhere. And the grave diggers go on strike. So bodies
Oh
aren't
my
buried.
goodness.
So
The
like
grave diggers.
yeah, but obviously the bin men, no, like dead bodies piled up, not buried, and like bin bags. If you Google winter discontent, you just see streets with people having to climb over bin bags of rubbish to get to work. I mean, if there's ever a visual image of the country being shit, it's like a whole pile of bin
So
bags.
getting trashed.
Literally, the country
Literally.
is trash at this point. And Callahan goes off to the Caribbean on holiday.
No, I'd go there too, I would say. I think
Yeah.
he's
He goes off on holiday when all this is happening, and he comes back, and this is the famous headline of Crisis, What Crisis? Because he's like, yeah,
yeah,
and it's like,
that's a good
wow,
one.
yeah, the people aren't feeling that. And so he doesn't deal with the Industrial Revolution. So this is now three successive prime ministers who are trying to deal with industrial relations and failing in their own way.
Yeah.
I think the question last year in the exam was like, which government dealt with trade unions the best? And my students were like, we didn't know how to answer the question because the answer was none of them. So they were like, how do we? It's a weird question because literally it's like they all failed. So
Yeah.
why would you? It's such an odd question to ask. So they didn't like that
Ha-
question. They still did.
No, but on the other hand, on the other hand, you could just pick one administration that you know the best and
Yeah, I
give the
think
reasons there.
Labour dealt with industrial relations better than the Conservatives, but it's not. It's a very low bar, and
Yeah.
because they at least had some areas of peace up until the winter of discontent, not really any out-and-out rebellion on it. But obviously, this makes Callahan look like he doesn't know what he's doing. And his failure to call the early election was quite important because he had poll numbers up before the winter of discontent. He could have called it beforehand, he didn't.
Yeah.
Because as it's
That would
always,
have been a good, yeah, that was a
yeah.
missed opportunity.
Well, it's always the case in England. When they call in 4 years, it's because they think they're going to win. When you call in five, you're going to lose. It's without fail, apart from Major, who
Hmm.
won in 92, the only one.
Hmm.
Uh,
Okay.
and then
What about the third point?
managing the Labour Party. So he allowed a referendum in Europe to calm down the issue. So that allowed the split because there was a referendum. So, and he won it to stay in, unlike Brexit. So that's where maybe if Wilson had been running the anti-Brexit campaign, it might not happen. He negotiates, Callaghan then negotiates the Liberal Labour Pact in 1977 to prop up the government. So he's quite successful at managing to keep the government in power. But then, really weirdly, ends the Liberal and Labour Pact in 1978, just before the election, which is kind of oddly bad management because it's then that vote of no, Thatcher then gets a vote of no confidence that brings down the government, which means she can call the time of the election.
Mhm.
And he managed, and Callaghan was still just about holding down. The left-right divisions were there, but they didn't go as big as they do when they explode in the 1980s and the party splits in two. Because literally, when the SDP members like Jenkins and old school right-wing Labour leave the Labour Party, and that was what they were worried was going to happen under Corbyn, there'd be another split. But the Labour had
Hmm.
learned from how badly they were damaged by that. And I think that was why they were
Yes.
reluctant to split it. So again, learning from the past. But Callaghan had failed to get Labour support on devolution of Scotland and Wales, which lost them the support of nationalist parties. So he lost the support of the nationalist parties, he lost the support of the Liberal Party, he managed to alienate every other party outside. Obviously, devolution eventually gets passed under Blair when Labour come back in. They do what Callaghan failed to deliver on. The party was shifting to the left. So Tony Benn and Michael Foot started to become influential. Of course, Foot led them into the next election in 82 afterwards when he was running for, sorry, 83. And there were Labour divisions over Europe, but again, Wilson allowing the referendum calmed that down a little bit. But Wilson's resignation left weakness at the top of the government because Wilson was Wilson had won 4 elections as a Labour Party leader, two in 74,
Yeah.
back to the polls, 64 and 66. No Labour leaders won 4 elections. I mean, I still count he won really two because it's like they weren't really like massively apart. But you can't deny his own popularity, and Callaghan was seemingly ill-equipped to lead the major party. So I would say, what do you reckon overall? Successful failures?
Well, I think it's leaning towards the failure. I mean, if you're offered that binary and you want to argue the slightly stronger one, I think I would say. But I mean, the inflation point
Yeah,
is
yeah.
is pretty significant, but I still think overall, I would go failure.
Yeah, I think the only way you can ever go any kind of success for any of these later governments just gets worse and worse.
Yeah, and the IMF loan, I mean, really,
Yeah, you could go. It's not as bad as under Heath, I suppose, and you could
yes, that's
also
right.
argue that it's the macroeconomic wins and the economic situation they inherit is so bad they did what they
Sure.
best they could with it, which is also possible. But either way, it's not like you're going to go there and out success. It's just like
I
how,
think, yeah, if you put it this way, I think it's easier to argue for its failure than it is for this
yeah.
success.
And
Yeah,
by now, the Keynesian post-war consensus is not working. So we're
yeah.
getting up to 79, set the platform for next week, all of the ones we're going to do next week. 79, country's got a choice. You can go left. I mean, it's clearly that the Keynesian economics and the post-war consensus isn't working, hasn't been working now. Like Macmillan failed at the end of Macmillan. Hume didn't do anything. Well, he wasn't there long enough, but he didn't do anything with it. Wilson couldn't do anything in his first term. Heath couldn't fix it. Wilson couldn't do it again, and Callaghan can't do it. That's a significant number of prime ministers unable to fix this economic situation. So there's only really two choices. Do you go right to Thatcher and Thatcherism, or do you go left and you give the trade unions more power? And I think the country was like, I think they've had enough power. Even then, it was still a close election in 79.
Yeah.
But this is the
Um,
dilemma. Spoiler, where does the country decide to go?
that's a good segue. That's a good,
Yeah.
dare I say, cliffhanger.
Yeah, we'll leave on that and
Um,
we'll finish. We'll do next week. We'll do the uh, Thatcher and all of the remaining international relations. Okay.